I almost get the sense with you guys that you have to rip everything apart and start over each time. Like, to find a song and to find an improvisation that turns into something, you can't recreate that formula, right?
We try, and what we will do, particularly, I think, working with Eno, who's a master of directing inspiration. That's one of his big things. I'm sure you're aware of his oblique strategies. He call them tarot cards, but they're basically ways to take a session from being in a kind of safe, orderly, predictable place and knock it instantly into a kind of beautiful chaos. So they are cards which suggest a change of strategy within the studio. So he'd shuffle the deck and he might take one out and it might say, everybody swap instruments. Or, whatever song you're playing, play it at halftime. Or something quite dramatically different, but playful, But what that really spoke to was Eno's understanding that the inspiration is often about being out of your comfort zone or trying something different, risking failure, as it were, and getting out of that very conscious place that we all are in most of the time. So that's, for us, that became a thing that we would try and do and find ways to unlock the creativity in the other members of the band and things you would do. And so we tell all our studio engineers the same thing when they come in, the juniors. We say, look, when you're in the studio, when you imagine that there's no point in putting the machine in to record, those are the times you probably ought to be poised ready to record. And then the times when you're absolutely certain that you ought to be recording, they're probably not worth recording. Because what would often happen in a U2 session, it's happened dozens of times, we'd be there to cut the backing track for a song. And then someone idly will start playing something else. And then we'll all kind of slowly tune in and start playing along. And then most studio engineers who aren't used to us won't bother recording that because they'll know, well, we're supposed to be doing the backtrack. In fact, often those things turn out to be the best thing. It's just a feature of the U2 session that's confounding. And it's confounding for us as well. But it's really hard to know what's going to spark and what's going to kick off an important recording versus one where it's a lot of effort but probably not much to show for it.
It's funny, it's like I see this dichotomy between you being someone who's obsessive about tone and the exact right sound and everything, and yet some of your greatest successes come from complete accidental improvisation, and those two have to meet and work together.
And then what's confounding about it is you still can't dial it up, that sort of creative inspiration is, you're waiting around for it. I've talked to a lot of musicians and producers over the years, and Quincy Jones talks about it as God walking through the room, that you get a session where everything is perfect and yet it's just lacking that spirit, that spark.
Right.
Often we seem to have a problem really doing our best work in the expensive studios when everything's like perfect. I think about instruments a little bit like that, custom guitars where everything's technically perfect and you pick it up and it's like, this is the best feeling performing instrument I've ever had. It's amazing. You go and try and write a song with it or, record with it, and it's just, there's nothing there. Whereas you pick up some funky old, beaten up old Telecaster or Strat and there's songs in there, and it's inspiration, and you just find yourself just playing parts that are going to go somewhere. And I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I think it was Charles Bukowski who once said that nothing worth a shit was ever written in peace and quiet. And I think that rock and roll is a little bit like that. It's like it needs to have a little grit to make it work properly.
I'm curious about, the idea of wanting to make a record and how far away that seemed. But I get the sense that you guys sat down and you schemed and you plotted a little bit. How did that come about, that to find a label or to find a manager or to make that first record?
The first step along the way was we entered this competition in Limerick in 1978, which we ultimately won. And the sort of first prize was...
Like a battle of the bands?
Yeah, it was a battle of the bands. What we got from that was £500, which is a fortune for us in those days, and the right to make a single for CBS Ireland.
So you used all $500 to make 3 songs?
Well, actually, we did a bunch of things. We did a photo session. We got to make a poster, which was really important. We hadn't actually ever had a U2 poster up until that point. Got to buy some clothes, that, because we were literally, we were still wearing the stuff our mothers had bought us, up to that point, pretty much. But it gave us the thirst to get to the next level, which was an album deal. And so we persuaded our manager, Paul McGuinness, that this was an important thing. He tried to persuade us against it. Paul was like, we really ought not to, but if you really want to, I'll organize some shows, like maybe 5 or 6 small shows, showcase gigs in London, and if we work really hard getting demo tapes to the record labels, maybe they'll come to the shows and we'll get you an album deal from that. So we had to go borrow money from all of our friends and family, and we got enough together to just get us there. So we got to London. We did a couple of very famous gigs. We did the Hope and Anchor, which is a very famous gig. But unfortunately, we were quite sporadic live in those days. We weren't a particularly reliable live act. And we just didn't impress. It just didn't happen for us. The London crowds were too laid back, and we probably weren't at our most confident. So we saw literally every single London record company, and every single one of them passed over us and said no, they didn't want to do the deal.
You're kidding.
So we got back to Dublin, totally dejected, and I can't remember how it came about. I'm sure it was our manager, Paul McGuinness. He suggested that we play a homecoming gig in Dublin. And we were thinking, one of the bars we'd played before, and we're like, okay, that's maybe not that exciting. And he said, no, I've been talking to my friend Dave Kavanagh, and we think you should play this boxing stadium, which is like a 2,000-seater. And we're like, wow. And he said, look, we'll get in touch with all our friends, we'll advertise, we'll do the big U2 homecoming show, and we'll make it big, and we'll at least get something out of this London trip. So we agreed, and I don't know how, of the 2,000 seats, we probably sold 900 or something. It was respectable. It was certainly not sold out, but it was respectable. So we did the show, and as it happens, it was one of our best shows. Really an amazing night, and all our crowd were down the front, and it was the big celebration of U2 coming back to Dublin. What we didn't know was that the A&R man from Island Records had missed us in London. He'd been away, so he, without telling us, flew to Dublin, went straight from the airport to the gig.
It's like waiting for Guffman or something.
It's he saw this show, flipped out, and we were in the dressing room after the show, still kind of feeling a little sick to our stomach about the London trip. And he walked in and he said, I want to sign you guys. I want to sign you right now. It's the best show I've seen in months. And basically from utter, on the floor, knocked out cold disaster, we, within a week, turned it around and got our deal with Island Records.
Did it seem important to you to actually succeed in America, even when you were that young, or was it more like, this is bigger than we ever imagined, so let's just enjoy it?
We really liked the idea of doing well in America. At that point, we didn't suffer from the sort of cultural disdain that seemed to permeate a lot of the UK punk bands. They just arrived in New York, played a couple of shows, insulted a lot of radio DJs and other people in the music business, and went home and thought they had kind of been to America,
Right.
done it.
Right.
And we arrived. We were hungry to see all the different parts of the country, and I guess without that attitude, we just started to win people over, and then it just got really exciting because we thought, wow, our music, which is definitely Irish, but influenced by the UK and this sort of European, it started to actually connect.
Was there an example of something there that really struck you as worlds colliding?
In the case of one show in Boston, we were second on the bill to a band who at the time were a well kind of regarded up and coming Boston band called Beruga.
Okay.
So we went on at 7 o'clock, did our 40-minute set, and the place went nuts. We thought, wow, this is amazing. The Beruga audience are clearly like a very generous crowd. So we went back to the dressing room, and we all wandered down later to see the headline act. We got down there, and everyone had gone. And we realized that even though we were second on the bill, everyone had come to see U2. So it was such a surprise to us. We'd never played in Boston before. What we discovered was that the subculture was alive and well in the kind of college radio scene.
Right.
So there were little moments like that where you suddenly, what's going on? This is weird, but great. And when we finally got to play Red Rocks, that was another one of those moments where it felt like a real watershed. That's
Yeah.
actually an amazing story, because with everything about U2, we always doubled down with everything. Like, there was never any safety net with us. It was like, so we'd made a little money on the tour, so what are we going to do? Let's invest it in a tour, like a live concert film. So we get to Red Rocks, and it's an outdoor venue, as you know, but it's up in the mountains, quite high up, and the weather has gone against us, and all these clouds are moving in, and it's starting to rain, and rain pretty badly. All the camera crews are sort of hiding under cover, and our promoter's saying, I have to cancel the show. We'll put it on in 3 weeks' time or whatever. We're like, no, you don't understand. We have to perform. We got this live film to shoot, and about 2 hours or 3 hours before we were due to go on, and a few people were starting to show up. The weather started to get a bit better. So the point of stopping raining, it was still like walking into a huge cloud, but we announced on radio we're going ahead with the show. It turned out to be one of the legendary U2 shows.
Yeah, but it's funny hearing that story and knowing that what the stakes were for you guys.
Yeah, we would have been broke, and none of it was planned. I mean, even the white flag that became such a big symbol of that tour was just something Bono grabbed out of the audience initially, and afterwards we went, well, that was kind of good. Maybe we should feed that into the show more often. And next thing, it's kind of, we actually started to make these flagpoles, and I mean, we got so much stick for that, but I think as a symbol it really was potent. It summed up sort of our attitude at that time, and it was a little gauche, probably a little OTT, but that's who we were. We were that committed, we were that passionate about it, and the one thing we never suffered from, I suppose, was a debilitating sense of cool.
No. No, but
we
it
were
also
willing to
sounds
go
like-
out there and be as uncool as was required, as long as it felt right, as long as we believed it.